Will Virginia have its country music moment? When most people think about country music, they typically think about two different places, Tennessee and Texas. But there's a range of influences from all over the country, including in my home state here of Virginia. Virginia has made a big mark on the history of country music, and yet I feel like it often doesn't get the recognition it deserves for its contributions. And I think part of that is that despite having big impacts on the history and foundation of the genre, as well as some big stars from the state, Virginia has never really had its country music moment in the way that a lot of other regions have. So in this video, I'm going to explore a little bit about the history of country music in Virginia, those iconic artists, and what maybe the future of country music in Virginia looks like. Are we on the edge of a breakout moment for the genre in this state? First off, if you're interested in the history of country music, I can't recommend Ken Burns' wonderful documentary on country music enough, as well as the companion book that goes with it. A lot of my research on this subject came out of that documentary and that book, at least as a starting point. And I think before talking about the history of country music in Virginia, kind of had to talk about the history of Virginia itself. So Virginia is the site of one of the earliest European settlements in the entire country, founded in the 17th century. It of course was one of the original 13 colonies, so that means it was originally settled primarily by the English, who stayed mostly in the Tidewater region before expanding out into central Virginia. There are several distinct regions of Virginia with different cultures to each of them. So first you have the Tidewater, these are the coastal regions. It has a reputation of there being a lot of wealth around, and generally it's part of the Commonwealth, but it's kind of its own thing. Like, someone from Bristol and someone from Norfolk are not going to have that much in common at all. Then you have Central Virginia and the Piedmont. This will be like around Richmond, Charlottesville kind of area, Farmville. Richmond is the state capital, located in the center here. There's some interesting demographics at play here. You do have a lot of poverty, but you do also have a lot of wealth as well. And with the Blue Ridge and the Shenandoah Valley, you're going to have these kind of mountain communities. It's going to be more rural. There's like an interesting mix of conservatism and also hippies in these regions. And generally, you're not seeing the same amount of wealth in these areas as you are in, say, Northern Virginia, the Tidewater, Central Virginia. And then speaking of Northern Virginia, this is in the DC metro area. These are the suburbs. The suburbs keep expanding further and further out. There's new construction all the time. There are a lot of people from other parts of the country. There are a lot of immigrants that live in the area. And most of the economy is based either around the government, military contracting, or big tech. And then lastly, you have Southwest Virginia and the Appalachian Plateau. Some counties in Virginia are considered part of Appalachia, but are kind of on the outer edge of it for the most part. But when you get into Southwest Virginia, it has more of an Appalachian influence. Along with all these regions being different from one another culturally, they also have some musical differences. So with each new group arriving in Virginia, whether by choice or by force, they brought with them their own musical styles and contributions that eventually were kind of distilled and became part of the local folk tradition. Unfortunately, Virginia's history is inseparably tied to the slave trade. Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War. African slaves brought with them the banjo, or at least the instruments that would eventually become the banjo. And as we got into the 17th and 18th century, settlers from Pennsylvania made their way down into the Shenandoah Valley and into Appalachia. Primarily, Mennonites and Quakers made their way into the valley. People that are brought up in the Mennonite church, there's a strong focus on singing and music in that culture. And that Mennonite presence is still felt very much to this day. And before we really had the big bang of country music, there were a lot of folk traditions that were starting to take shape. Like for instance, in Rockingham County in the 1800s, we started to see the rise of the shape note singing. Southern shape note singing traces its origin to the book Kentucky Harmony. Basically, it was the system of teaching singing that involved these different shaped notes, and you would look at the shape and you would know what your pitch was supposed to be. The whole point of it was for it to be very easy for people to latch onto. And while shape note singing predates this particular publication, this publication was the gateway to being taught all over the South and all over the country. And of course, a lot of old folk tunes have become the basis of modern country songs. When people think of folk music, they generally think of acoustic instruments and singer-songwriters and things like that. But that's not really what folk music is. What makes folk music is the folk part of it, the people. It's born out of traditional roots. Oftentimes older songs and older melodies are taken and updated with the sentiments of the time. And Carry Me Back to Ol Virginny, which was at one time Virginia's state song, is a really good example of this, actually. The lyrics have changed some over the years because they originally came out of the minstrel tradition, but it's one of those examples of what we see in folk music where an older melody or older lyrics are updated as time goes on and reinvented by new artists. The beautiful thing about the folk music tradition is you can borrow from a variety of different sources and make them reflective of your own values. So that's setting the stage. But if we want to talk about the history of country music in Virginia and country music as a whole, the first place you need to look at is the Bristol Sessions of 1927, where Ralph Peer traveled to Bristol, which was a city that kind of straddles the border of Virginia and Tennessee, to record local acts. And this moment is usually referred to as the Big Bang of country music. Two particular artists became stars out of this session: Jimmie Rodgers and Virginia's own, the first family of country music, the Carter family. The Carter family infused the country music genre with the more traditional sound. They were singing older gospel songs, older folk songs. A.P. Carter would famously drive around Southwest Virginia trying to collect songs from people for the group to record. Maybelle Carter may be the most influential guitar player of all time. The Carter family, of course, had this deep connection to the Grand Ole Opry and, of course, to Johnny Cash through June Carter Cash. Songs like Keep on the Sunny Side and Will the Circle Be Unbroken have been covered so many times by so many different artists. And really, without the Carter family, we would not have country music as we know it today. Now, in the period following the Carter family's rise to fame, country music in Virginia was a little bit spotty in terms of what artists were around. With the rise of bluegrass in the late 30s and early 40s, we saw the Stanley Brothers come out of Dickinson County, which is in southwest Virginia. The brothers formed the group the Clinch Mountain Boys and started performing together after they got back from World War II. They were very much inspired by Bill Monroe, who was famously not very happy about the imitation. And while Carter Stanley died in 1966, his brother Ralph went on to be very influential in the world of old time and bluegrass, was a very revered banjo player who inspired a lot of young artists, probably most notably being Ricky Skaggs. And he went on to be somewhat of a legend in his later years, still showing up at events up until his death in 2016. And that brings us to arguably the biggest country music star to ever come out of Virginia, Patsy Cline. Patsy Cline was born and grew up in Winchester, Virginia. When her abusive father abandoned her family at about the time she was 15, Patsy started working day jobs in drug and convenience stores, while also singing at night in clubs and bars. She had a pretty rough go at it in the early years of her career, but through pure determination and unmistakable talent, was able to rise to become one of the most beloved and influential country stars of all time. She broke out with her still iconic song Walkin' After Midnight, and it would take her a couple years to come around to having another hit. But in the early 60s, she started becoming really influential in defining what the sound of the country music of that era was. Songs like I Fall to Pieces and Crazy had a huge amount of pop crossover appeal, really helped solidify the Nashville sound of the time, which was going for this kind of more refined urbanite palette, relying more on sensibilities of pop music of the day, using soft strings instead of a hard-driving fiddle, having gospel singers in the background. And this sound would really help kind of define the era for country music and help bring country music to being taken seriously and being on mainstream airwaves. In a lot of ways, you could say Patsy Cline helped pave the way for these pop country crossover acts that we see today. And she really helped popularize country music for people that maybe before had not been so into it, but we're now willing to give it a try. There's that age-old debate about, oh, we don't need pop and country music, and it's like, don't get me wrong, I'm gonna choose to listen to my alt country and Americana and stuff more times than not, but if you want to see the genre grow, I mean, there kind of has to be something out there that's commercially viable. And on its own, being commercially viable isn't a bad thing. In fact, I'd argue for the overall health and growth of the country music genre, having some element of it being commercial, being appealing to mass audiences, is good. It means there's more interest in the genre, it means more artists get paid. There are a lot of positive upsides of it. And let's face it, even good music won't appeal to everybody. So if you want to see a genre as a whole grow, you've really got to see a lot of variety throughout it. Things that will appeal to different groups of people. And when artists like Patsy Cline have pop crossovers, they sound incredible. You can hear the pain in her voice singing Crazy. That is a heart-wrenching song. You can't deny her influence, you can't deny her talent. Patsy was known for being determined and tough, and a lot of times it was her way or the highway. She was influential in helping a young Loretta Lynn break out and giving her career advice. Crazy was a huge song for her and one of Willie Nelson's earliest songwriting successes. That's right, if you didn't know it, Crazy was written by Willie Nelson. Pretty cool. Patsy had also kind of a funny habit of you read about the story behind these songs, and a lot of times the songs that were given to her, she was like, I hate this song. And then she recorded it and it ended up being a huge hit. And I think part of the reason for that is that Patsy wanted to be a bit more of the country act, and then she really wanted to be the pop crossover act, but the pop stuff was working for her. But no matter how you look at it, she's gone down as one of the most influential and important acts in country music history. And I think unfortunately her story is one of those what could have been sort of situations. because at the height of her career, at the height of her popularity and talent, she died tragically in a plane accident. And then in the early to mid-60s, a vocal group out of Stanton, Virginia started to break out. And yes, hey, if you want a surefire sign to know if someone's a local or not, show them the word Stanton and ask them to pronounce it. Don't say it out loud for them. Just ask them to pronounce it. I think it's funny how every state has these couple of towns that, unless you're from there, you would never guess that that's how it's pronounced. But the Statler Brothers were a 4-part vocal group. They infused a lot of gospel music into their sound and brought that into country music. They particularly impressed Johnny Cash, who ended up bringing them on tour with him for a while, both as an opening act, also sitting in with him in the band, singing background vocals. Featured them a bunch on the Johnny Cash show. Most people know the song Flowers on the Wall. They had a lot of influence, and their legacy is certainly remembered by local Stantonites. Okay, I grew up nearby, and I don't even know if that's the right term. I think it's also worth noting that Roy Clark, famous entertainer and guitar virtuoso, probably most notable for his role on the TV show Hee Haw. He was born in Virginia as well, and grew up in between Virginia, New York, and Washington, D.C., playing around in some of the clubs in D.C. and in the Northern Virginia area at the time when he was younger, before making his big splash in Nashville. Then going on into the 70s and 80s, things are a little bit sparse again. And as we go into the 90s and early 2000s, a couple notable country stars came out of Virginia. Phil Vassar, you might know him from Another Day in Paradise or his song Carlene. He's from Lynchburg, Virginia, went to James Madison University, my alma mater, before going down to Nashville and becoming a hit songwriter, winning multiple awards. Fun personal note, I've actually opened for Phil a couple times. He's a super nice guy. Then Kenny Alfin, or Big Kenny, from the duo Big and Rich. He's also from Culpeper, Virginia. But I think one of Virginia's most resounding contributions to country music is that of the band Old Crow Medicine Show. Founding members Ketch Secur and Critter Fuqua. I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right. They grew up in the Shenandoah Valley near Harrisonburg, Virginia. Ketch Secur went to boarding school up in New England, where as a young man he encountered a lot of traditional folk music as well as more modern contemporary such as Bob Dylan, and it was there where he first encountered the little scrap of vocal that would eventually become one of the biggest country hits of the modern era, Wagon Wheel. Go Shenandoah Valley, put another one on the board. We got one on the board for Patsy, we got another one on for Ketch Secur. And so while not all the members of Old Crow Medicine Show are from Virginia, Ketch Secur is someone that's extremely knowledgeable about the history and origins of country music and American folk music in general. It's no surprise he's become kind of a torchbearer for traditional music, reinterpreting it, and constantly helps redefine what that looks like in the public sphere. It's funny being from the Valley too, because there are all these people that I know or have met that know Ketch Secur, or like one of my dad's friends taught him in middle school gym, which is kind of hilarious to me. They're one of the best live acts you will ever see. Hands down. They're so much fun. And that's not the only influence that Harrisonburg has had on this type of music. The Steel Wheels is from there, and they put on the Red Wing Roots Festival every year, where a bunch of rising roots artists come together. And so that really brings us now to the modern era. There are a couple big country stars that are out of Virginia. Kanan Smith, who had a good breakout a couple of years ago, is from Williamsburg. A lot of the members of Old Dominion are from the Roanoke area. And Shabuzi, who's currently topping the Billboard charts with his kind of country rap crossover song, a bar song Tipsy. He's from Woodbridge, Virginia. And then on the independent side, we've seen a couple of interesting rises in the past couple of years. I think one of the best artists to come out of Virginia recently has been Morgan Wade, she's from Floyd, Virginia. Fantastic singer-songwriter. Oh my god, check out Morgan Wade. The somewhat controversial Oliver Anthony, who came out of Farmville, Virginia. No one's really sure whether his rise to fame was organic or not. Kind of looks like it really wasn't. And then I'm not really sure what his career has been since then. I know he's still doing shows. I think he kind of just had that one song that pissed a lot of people off, or some people loved it, and then I don't know. And right now there's kind of an interesting moment happening again in Winchester, Virginia, with some independent country artists up there. Jake Cohn is probably the leading one right now. He's kind of had this breakout moment recently where I believe he's signed to Atlantic Records. He had a song on the new Twisters album. He's been touring with a bunch of people. He's just like a 17-year-old kid who's got this really deep, gravelly voice, and it's an interesting singer-songwriter as well. Right now, we're at a period where it seems like more artists coming out of Virginia are starting to make it into national circuits. Maybe aren't the most mainstream, maybe aren't the most well-known, but there's kind of an interesting thing bubbling up right now. Will Virginia have its country music moment? Because Virginia has contributed so much to the genre, but it's always kind of been in bits and pieces. And while Virginia hasn't had its breakout country moment yet, it could be right around the corner. I think back to the mid-2010s, where in a short couple of years we had this big explosion out of eastern Kentucky with Chris Stapleton, Sturgill Simpson, Tyler Childers, Ian Noe, and so many other artists coming out of that scene. And while there are some Virginia artists that definitely kind of falling into that Appalachian style, I do think there are some unique things happening on their own. So as it stands right now, in the modern era, Southwest Virginia has had the most luck of getting artists elevated. I mentioned Morgan Wade earlier, who's from Southwest Virginia, but also another great country act that's come out there recently is 49 Winchester, who's really helped put a spotlight on great country music from Virginia. They're on tour right now with Maggie Antone, who's from Richmond. So Southwest Virginia's really got its own thing going on right now. That's really helped boost the state's music scene. But I don't think it's enough to really prop up the whole state's country music image on a national level. And I can kind of see two different paths for this. To me, it makes the most sense it would either come out of Richmond, which has a long track record of supporting rising Americana and country artists. There are venues, there are audiences for it. In fact, I really think you should check out some of the artists on Vocal Rest Records out of Richmond, Virginia. There's an interesting scene going on there with alternative country music with artists such as the Wilson Springs Hotel, Cassidy Snyder and the Wranglers, Mackenzie Rourke. Locally, there's music industry infrastructure in place in Central Virginia. Red Light Management, a huge management company, is only an hour north of Richmond up in Charlottesville. But it's kind of my perception that they don't really pay a lot of attention to the local music scene. They're more focused on the heavy hitters in the industry. And I think it's really going to be up to people who are focused on the music at a local and regional scale to help elevate it. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of that spectrum, in the Shenandoah Valley, there are a lot of artists doing interesting things right now with country music, Americana, roots music in general, but there's not as much infrastructure to support it. So we're seeing this juxtaposition of some really great pure artistry and really the means to support it. I'll shout out the Low Water Bridge Band, Rebecca Porter, Palmyra, who actually I think they just got signed to John Prine's label, Oh Boy Records. I'm not sure if they consider themselves from the Valley, but I think they started at JMU. So my opinion is that if Virginia is to have a breakout moment in country music, Richmond will play an important role, but I kind of think the artists are going to be from the Shenandoah Valley and the Blue Ridge Mountains. There's so much raw potential here, and just like back in that original Bristol session in 1927, we need that spark to cause a big bang. And that's only really going to happen if we unite as a community around this state's music scene. So what happens next is hard to say, but I do think we're in a better position than we ever have been for Virginia to have its breakout country music moment. I don't know who it's going to be, I don't know what it's going to be, but I think we could see it in the next couple of years, Virginia have a big moment in country music. And I hope it does happen because Virginia is a beautiful place with a lot of great artists. I've met some wonderful people around the state playing music and heard some of the best music I've ever heard in my life. And I know a lot of these people, whether directly or tangentially, and I know they're hardworking. I know they have great things in mind, and I'm just hoping all the best for them because I think they deserve it. Alright, so that's my breakdown of the history of country music in Virginia. Do you have a favorite country music artist from Virginia? If so, leave a comment. I always love to learn more about my home state's music scene and discover more music. I'm Brent Funkhauser from Red Moon Media. If you like this, please subscribe, share it, like, comment, and I plan on doing more videos like this. So if you're interested in Virginia's music scene, Americana, alt country, any of those kind of things, follow along. There will be plenty more.